Welcome to Econ 102, where economist Noah Smith and I make sense of what's happening in the news, technology, business, and beyond through the lens of economics. Let's jump right in.
Before we get to today's episode, please note, this information is for general educational purposes only and is not a recommendation to buy, hold, or sell any investment or financial product. Turpentine is an acquisition of A16Z Holdings LLC and is not a bank, investment advisor, or broker-dealer. This podcast includes paid promotional advertisements, and individuals and companies featured or advertised during this podcast are not endorsing AH Capital or any of its affiliates, including but not limited to A16Z Perennial Management LP. Similarly, Turpentine is not endorsing affiliates, individuals, or any entities featured on this podcast. All investments involve risk, including the possible loss of capital. Past performance is no guarantee of future results, and the opinions presented cannot be viewed as an indicator of future performance. Before making decisions with legal, tax, or accounting effects, you should consult appropriate professionals. Information is from sources deemed reliable on the date of publication, but Turpentine does not guarantee its accuracy. Now let's get started.
Howdy.
Good to see you, man. A lot has happened in the world since we last caught up 2 weeks ago.
I know we've been out. We bombed Iran.
Yeah. Oh my God.
We elected a Muslim socialist.
Yes. Is it almost like AOC winning, like being mayor of New York? Like, what's the right way to think about this election?
He's more like radical than AOC, I think. At least he was. Like a lot of the leftist stuff that he used to say was more radical than anything like AOC ever said. Like when some Islamic terrorist killed some like British soldiers, he posted like some Glenn Greenwald link saying it wasn't terrorism because they were soldiers. So yeah, he was pretty extreme dude, and he's had sort of a makeover, and now he's talking about like affordability. He's meeting with all these developers. He's a YIMBY now, and he's talking about like my Jewish brothers and sisters and things like that. And so it's people's ideologies can be fairly plastic.
Yeah. What do you expect to? Let's say he wins, or like what's going to happen as a result of this? What's your prediction?
Well, I think that, assuming he beats Adams, I think that he will probably try to do some, splashy, flashy, like socialisty things. Like, I opened a government grocery store, and then, a million conservatives will descend on the government grocery store and say, the government grocery store is not doing well. And then the government grocery store will be quietly closed. And then people will like write little articles for like The Cut or, whatever, saying like, here's why it actually closed. It was actually mismanaged by this person you've never heard of. And so, some nothing burger like that. As for the YIMBY stuff, like he'll try to, he'll be like, we need to build all this housing, and then like put a million riders on it like progressives tend to do, that the so-called everything bagel. And then like New York will keep building housing at the rate of 20,000 units a year.
Yeah.
As it has been doing, which is like not enough, but like more than zero. It'll be like, yes, we built 20,000 units a year. Yes, we're succeeding. And then, that'll happen. And then he'll increase funding for like community responders who will not actually be as effective as police because like, it turns out unarmed people aren't actually that good for dealing with crazies, and then, or, whatever. And then, so like the police will quietly like creep back in. I don't think he's going to like publicly fight with the police like de Blasio did. And which would go badly for him. So I basically think it's going to be like, think about San Francisco policies, like translate this to New York, but not quite as bad. Like, New York is never quite as bad as San Francisco when they get bad, but San Francisco is getting much better. So like we have a chance to sort of steal a march on New York City here and actually be better than them right now.
Wow. Well, let's actually segue to the around. What are your reactions to what's happening around what is likely to occur going forward? You also had a piece about the economic consequences we should get into, but why don't you first start with your broad reflections?
I don't really have that much of an opinion here. I think it's kind of a nothing burger. It's sort of an exaggerated thing, like the Israel-Iran war is probably significant for the region. I hope that the Iranian regime falls for a very simple reason, besides the fact that they suck. I mean, I don't like sucky regimes, but I hope that they fall so that America has absolutely no interest in the Middle East, and we never have to be involved in the Middle East, and we can just say, goodbye, Middle East. We produce all our own oil. We don't need you. Like there's no like if Iranian regime falls and is replaced with something reasonable, there would not be the specter of like an Israel-Iran like apocalyptic war, or like, Saudi versus Iran or all this stuff. And it's just like another like sort of, all the other regimes in the Middle East are all just sort of, I mean, Syria is now just these fairly chilled out guys. Like people are like, oh, it's ISIS. No, it's not. It's just like some chilled out, like Jelani's like a chilled out dude. Like HTS, they're not ISIS. Shut up. And or like Lebanon, Hezbollah is basically gone. Israel just, with exploding pagers, and that was the end of that. That was the end of Hezbollah, most vaunted like militia, most powerful army in the Middle East. Just like oops, pagers explode. Like I can't, like there were such bad guys. I can't not laugh at that. You know what I mean?
No, it's pretty incredible.
Like we have no interest in like the fucking Palestinian conflict, really. Like Israel, they're stealing people's land, and like, but the Palestinians are just like, oh, we will destroy you, without any capability to destroy them. And it's just like it's just a bad scene. We shouldn't be like, we will play the peacemaker here, just because we tried to do that under Clinton, and we played peacemaker between Israel and like some other countries in the region, does not mean that we have an interest in like playing peacemaker between Israel and the Palestinians there. We can just say like, goodbye, this is not our fight.
So then what do you think about our decision to get involved here?
Well, they were like, okay, Iran's about to get a nuclear weapon, blah, blah, blah. We can destroy these things and set them back. And I'm not an expert here. I do not know if that's right. And I do not know if the bombing that we did was effective. Like, I just don't know. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, still too early to tell. What do you think about the economic impacts of this?
Nothing. Like, you could have somewhat higher oil prices, but you're not seeing that yet.
Yeah.
And so like it's a nothing burger. It's even if you saw higher oil prices, America's perfectly hedged. Like higher oil prices no longer hurt us. It makes people mad because gas prices go up. So it makes consumers mad, but then like it also pours money into the coffers of the whole oil industry, because we're a net oil producer now. And so like ultimately it's not that big a deal. And yeah, so I just think it's a big nothing burger. I don't think they're going to like cut off China from their oil supplies, because that would be a stupid move for them.
Yeah. Going back to our economy, so are you worried right now? Are you cautiously optimistic? Because at the peak of or nadir of the tariff situation, there was a high chance, or a lot of people thought we were going into a recession, and it doesn't seem. Yeah, I guess what is kind of your sense of where we're at and what you're looking at to see where things go forward?
Yeah, so a recession, there's no actual definition of recession other than what the NBER, this group of economists, say is a recession, right? It's their call to make. The typical criterion that we look at is two consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth is like the most standard rule of thumb. Not always, but that's usually what a recession is called. We just had a quarter of GDP growth. If we have another quarter of negative GDP growth, we had a quarter where our economy shrunk. If we have another quarter where our economy shrinks, like that is a recession. So like, oh, they said we're going to have a recession, we didn't. Well, where's the we didn't? Like we had 1/4 of negative GDP growth. If we have another, people are going to be saying recession. And interestingly, so economically, a recession is just below trend growth. It's just like, oh, you're below the trend, recession. You're expansion, recession, expansion, recession. So that's the, how economists think about it. But then for, in the press and the popular press and like the, NBR, whatever, we think it's only really a recession if we get poorer, right? Instead of like we get richer at a slower rate than we expected. So it's possible we will have a recession. And then like, well, are we going to have like 2008? No, we're not going to have that unless Trump does some really insane thing, like causes a default on the dollar or something. But no, so like we're not going to have that, but we could have like a mild recession. And that's like, well, we had a booming economy and then we just decided to slap it into a mild recession. Like, but the recession's mild, so it's okay. Like, I don't understand the thought process there. And I think Americans are not going to be happy. Like, if you look at Trump's approval rating on the economy, it's low. Like there was, people do not believe the idea that tariffs will sort of cause America to reindustrialize and, factories to just sprout up from the plains of Iowa like mushrooms after the rain. I don't think they expect that to actually happen, and it won't happen. Like if you want that to happen, maybe you need some tariffs, but you need a hell of a lot more. You need various industrial policies to make that happen. Like that's a huge effort that takes like a lot of smart people doing a lot of hard things that have never really been done before here. And we started doing that under Biden. And now, like the factories that Biden was, that Biden had incentivized to get built, like the private sector factories that were getting built, are now mostly on pause.
And remind us the exact things Biden was doing here.
So the CHIPS Act and the IRA were the two biggest policies. And what those did was those gave subsidies to companies to build factories, especially in semiconductors and batteries, but also some other things. But basically semiconductors and batteries, these strategic industries. We're going to build these factories and then we're going to pay you to build them. Now, people say, oh, well, you're paying them to build them. It's not real. It's just government, blah, blah. Well, what happened was that even before we disbursed even $1 of cash, companies committed to investing a very large, like 10x what we had committed to do in all of what we had said we planned to do in all of subsidies before $1 was even dispersed. And then the company started investing. So it was just like a coordination signal. We told them, okay, here's what you want to build. At some point, we'll give you like a bit of money, but not actually that much money, to be honest. And so then private companies just started building, especially in red states. So like the American South and the West, interior West, like got a lot of these factories because red states allow you to develop land and blue states don't. So that happened. And then so we did that, and then factories started going up. And then like tariff uncertainty and uncertainty over the continuation of those industrial policies and subsidies has put a hold on that construction. So we're no longer seeing as big of a construction boom.
And why don't blue states allow for that again? Is it because of environmentalist concerns largely?
Probably. And also just because like the culture of blue states is like very anti-growth. You can read Abundance, and you can also read Why Nothing Works, which I think is actually an even better book than Abundance. It's less of a manifesto and more of a history. But then I recommend reading Why Nothing Works as sort of the history of this. Like essentially in the 50s and 60s, we were like grow, highways, buildings, houses, stores, malls, everything. And then in the 70s, like Americans were like, hold up, we don't like growth bad, I want my lawn. And then like I want my nice views undisturbed by whatever, and I don't want any growth. And so like people voted to stop. So progressives became very anti-growth. And so this culture of anti-growth took hold in blue states and not in red states. You see some blue states trying to get it back, like Washington, Colorado, trying to get it back. Well, you see, and then some purple states, you see like Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania trying to get like the build culture back, but it's like very early days. You see the YIMBY movement, but that's why that exists. It exists because progressives had basically frozen blue states. And so anyway, anti-growth progressivism is much weaker in like Texas.
Right.
We'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Let's talk about scaling digital commerce for a moment. When Mr. Beast launched Feastables, he faced a challenge of scale. How do you build an e-commerce infrastructure that can handle millions of concurrent shoppers, process transactions instantly, and maintain stability during massive traffic spikes? The answer turned out to be deceptively simple: Shopify. Here's what's particularly interesting from a technical perspective. Shopify has built what's become the #1 checkout platform on the planet. They've created a system called Shop Pay that's solving one of e-commerce's biggest challenges: cart abandonment. The data shows it's boosting conversions by up to 50%. If you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. On the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between, everything's unified in one robust platform. It's a perfect example of how infrastructure, when done right, becomes a competitive advantage. Upgrade your business and get access to the same checkout system that powers Feastables. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/momentofzen, all lowercase. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, so visit shopify.com/momentofzen today. Shopify.com/momentofzen. It's an interesting time for business. Tariff and trade policies are dynamic, supply chains squeezed, and cash flow tighter than ever. If your business can't adapt in real time, you're in a world of hurt. You need total visibility, from global shipments to tariff impacts to real-time cash flow. That's NetSuite by Oracle, your AI-powered business management suite, trusted by over 42,000 businesses. NetSuite is the #1 cloud ERP for many reasons. It brings accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one suite. With one unified business management suite, there's one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control you need to make quick decisions. With real-time forecasting, you're peering into the future with actionable data. And with AI embedded throughout, you can automate a lot of those everyday tasks, letting your team stay strategic. NetSuite helps you know what's stuck, what it's costing you, and how to pivot fast. If I had needed this product, it's what I'd use. It's one system, full control. Tame the chaos with NetSuite. If your revenues are at least in the 7 figures, download the free ebook, Navigating Global Trade, 3 Insights for Leaders, at netsuite.com/102. That's netsuite.com/102.
This segues to you wrote this in your sort of progress up or your updates of the week, but sort of you were reflecting on how is it David Autor? How do I pronounce his name?
Autor, yeah.
Yeah, Autor. How he thinks we should revive U.S. manufacturing. What's your...
He and I agree.
Okay, so why don't you present that argument a little bit?
David Autor basically thinks like targeted tariffs for strategic industries plus industrial policies. This is what we need to do to revive manufacturing. And I think one thing that we might have disagreed on is that I think at some point he thought this would restore like middle income factory jobs, middle skilled, middle income factory jobs. And now he realized it can't, because we're only going to get manufacturing competitiveness back by going like all robot. Because that's what we can do, because we don't have cheap labor in this country. But that said, you can, I don't, not all robot, but like mostly robot, like, and when I say robot, oh, excuse me, I mean, I'm including like machine tools, right? Not just like your little hand robot. So we can get manufacturing competitiveness back. I mean, like, look at Elon. Elon has made, Elon makes more cars in America than he makes in China.
Yep.
Right? He makes it, it's like all American content. He makes it here. It works. He makes the Starship here in America. It's like we make the biggest rocket ever made. It's very cool. And we make like a lot of it, much more than China can make. And we do it all here with all American parts and stuff like that. And we do it, So like Elon's shown that can be done. And I hope that Anduril, Palmer Luckey, and I hope that some of these other, Hadrian, whoever, I hope that a lot of these defense-oriented manufacturers are talking to Elon and figuring out like what Elon did to be able to be like America's one good mass manufacturer, high-tech manufacturer. Because so far, we have not seen guys like Anduril producing in volume, right? Like there's Anduril prototype drones fighting Ukraine, and they're good. They're solid combat drones. But like, we haven't seen like a vast factory of robots producing like drones that blanket the sky. We haven't seen that. And, of course it's harder because drones, like you have commercial drones for the toy market, but then a lot, and they're like camera market, but like a lot of it is like military, and military is harder to get that scale. But then certainly people who want to make defense tech things should also be making civilian things for high volume, for efficiency, for technology, for scale. And Elon knows how to do that. And as a result, if we needed to produce stuff for war in America, Tesla would be one of the main companies we'd ask to produce our vehicles, and SpaceX would be one of the companies we would ask to produce our missiles. And, even in transports, I think Starship itself could be used as a hopping transport. And so, so we'd be running to Elon asking him to build all our stuff. So I think one of the things, and I gave a talk at Edge Esmeralda with Sam D'Amico, which you would have really enjoyed. Sam is super fun. We should have him on the podcast, actually.
Yeah, let's get him on. Yeah, I'm a big fan. Tell us about the talk.
We were talking about why China can build all these things, and we were talking about China's tech stack, and we were saying like what we really need are like 10 sub-Elons. Jeff Bezos tried to make a rocket company, and he's, it's sort of working now, but it's like it failed for a long time. And that's Bezos. We know that guy's a good entrepreneur. We know he's good at business, right? We know he understands technology, and he still failed to do what Elon did for a very long time, and is still way behind. And like, so we know that people who have almost all of Elon's strengths and skills still can't quite get to the Elon level. And so what we need to do is reduce regulations and, increase sort of, and fill in supply chains and do other stuff that will make it, suppose Elon can overcome 10 out of 10 problems that we have in our system, and the sub-Elons can only overcome 8 out of 10. Well, we need to eliminate 2 out of 10 so that the sub-Elons can come in and manufacture for us.
And Otter was famous also because of his perspective on China, right? And sort of
Right. He wrote the China Shock paper.
yeah. So when you explain it, because I want to sort of compare U.S. and China industrial policy a bit.
So the China Shock, which we now call the first China Shock because there's another one underway. What happened was this. China had a very state-controlled system. In the 80s, they experimented with liberalizing it and allowing private business and land sales. Then they were like, well, that worked well, except there was a brief inflation and there was an anti-inflation protest that they then crushed with tanks called Tiananmen Square. But then after that, they were like, okay, well, privatization did work well, so we're going to just privatize. So Deng Xiaoping went on the southern tour. He's like, privatize. So China didn't have a national industrial policy for 10 years or so. Right? For 10 years, they were just like privatize, liberalize, guys, invest enough. They joined the WTO. We let them into the WTO. And it was our companies and European companies and Japanese companies and Korean companies and all these rich world companies, French, German. It was our companies making stuff in China. It was using China as a cheap production platform for stuff that we designed and that we largely made the expensive components for, and that we were going to market and sell, and that we were just slapping together in a giant Foxconn factory in China, right? There's this book, Apple in China, which I have to read, but I kind of already know that whole story. So then, but we should read it and talk about it. But anyway, so then there was this, and China at the same time, the central government is like, they just kept their currency cheap. They assured cheap coal, cheap land, cheap financing from banks, kept their currency cheap. That's all they did. They just did macro shit, And then like the macro shit was enough. And the industrial policy was all done at the local level. And it was all done by like, sort of local politicians who wanted to climb up the ladder by producing local growth. And what they would do is they would court international business, multinational foreign companies to produce stuff in China by hook or by crook, any means necessary. Industrial policy was at the local and state level in China, the provincial level, which are their states. And so then our states and cities do the same thing. We give incentives to business to locate there. We try to build capacity, education, infrastructure, water, whatever. We do that. We don't do it to the same degree China does, but we do it. We have special low tax jurisdictions that look an awful lot like China's special enterprise zones. And so like we have these things and we do them. We just don't do them as hardcore as China because we're not as interested in like growth. And like, but it's states competing with other states in America. But in China, the national government didn't do a centralized industrial policy. And then Hu Jintao, late 2008, starts thinking, we're not making any money, guys. The foreign companies are actually making all the money on this because they're manufacturing the expensive components that we slap together, and they're doing the marketing and sales and the branding and all this stuff. And we're not getting any money here. That low value, like assembly work had already destroyed tons of American jobs. And that's what David Otter's paper is about. We let in and their currency made it artificially cheap, and their cheap land, artificially cheap energy, artificially cheap finance, artificially cheap everything made China artificially cheap. You couldn't beat the China price. And so all our companies went there and they sold American factory workers down the river. This is the story you've all heard about China. This is the story we all heard. And this is the story of the 2000s. It is now the 2020s. It's a little different. So what happened was that in the late 2000s, Hu Jintao, this old dude, who was actually a good, competent ruler, but not a very strong ruler, he said, all right, we're not making money. We need to advance up the technological value chain. So he made this plan to have China do level up technology so it could make the expensive components and be more like Korea, because Korea was the country China was trying to imitate all the time, right? Just like Korea tried to imitate Japan tried to imitate Germany, whatever. And then like China tried to imitate Korea, be giant Korea. And so with their industrial policy, that is, let's say, not their government, obviously. But anyway, so they did this, and then Xi Jinping comes in and he's like, okay, we're going to be more aggressive at this. And he does this policy called Made in China 2025. And he starts paying Chinese companies to make the expensive components that they were buying overseas. He says, we're going to subsidize this so we can be technologically self-sufficient, so that we make the chips, we make the screens. We're not just slapping together your stuff. It's not just like a whole bunch of like poor ladies from the country, like working in some like hot, dingy factory, like slapping shit together. We don't want to do that anymore. That's a crappy job. My grandma did that job in Chicago. But anyway, but yeah, so that's a crappy job. We don't want to do that. We want to do high-tech stuff. And then Xi Jinping is like, well, we want this for like military so we can conquer America and we can just be number one and big dog. Which his title for this is Great Changes Unseen in a Century. And Rush Doshi actually has a very good book about this. So then, hold on, I'm just watching my rabbit chew his way into a box of hay that he's not supposed to have. But anyway, you got to let him do his thing. Anyway, so Rush Doshi's written a great book where he just pores over the archives and basically, okay, Xi Jinping is special in that more than the other Chinese leaders, he wants to defeat America. That's what he wants. And so Xi Jinping starts thinking about this in military terms. He's like, we need these strategic industries, blah, blah, blah. So he really ramps up industrial policy a lot. And then there's the real estate bust in 2021 and 2. And China's economy slows down massively. Like they probably have a recession, but they lie and say they're still growing for a year, but in 22, but like they had a recession. And then they return to growth, but it's much lower than before. And they're like, we need to replace this real estate stuff. So Xi Jinping's like, industrial policy ramped up to like, to like a 12, and then like we're gonna just pay people to make all these things, and it's basically they're on like a World War II footing. They're basically doing the same thing we did for World War II production, but at peace. That has advantages and drawbacks. So what we're seeing now is the second China shock, which is so what's happening is that Xi Jinping is paying all these Chinese companies to make stuff. Okay, electric cars, semiconductors, batteries, solar panels, steel, robots, machine tools, ships. Okay, they're just paying to make all this shit. All right, and even aircraft. They're trying to make aircraft. China's not very good at combustion stuff. They're much better at electrical stuff. That's a whole nother story. But anyway, so they're paying all these people to make all this stuff. You're paying like a million billion companies. These companies are all competing with each other like crazy. It's like, and they're all competing on price. They're not like differentiating themselves and like being like cool branding companies. They're like, they're just taking the money and they're just ruthlessly trying to like knock down price by any means necessary. What happens then? No profit. Nobody's making any profit in China. So these companies are like, oh my God, we just made too many freaking electric cars, bro. We got to sell these somewhere. So they're like, Europe, buy our electric cars. And Europe's like, okay, we don't like climate change. We'll buy all your electric cars and we'll give up our entire auto industry so that we can buy your electric cars to prevent climate change. Derp. And then so, Europe did that. And then America's like, we don't want your electric cars. Electric cars are gay. I want a car that runs on whiskey. I don't know. Anyway, so then like, sorry, bioethanol. Anyway, so then that's really just rot gut in car form, isn't it? So anyway, so then they're like, Southeast Asia, how would you like an electric car? They're like, cheap car. Cool. I'll take that. Brazil, how would you like a cheap car? Brazil's like, cheap car. And so then they're like, but those are relatively small markets. So Europe is like now their biggest market for these cars. And so China becomes the number one car maker on earth, but BYD is having to like stiff its suppliers, and then like it will defeat Tesla if it, but it's not going to because BYD is being dragged down by 100 little angry goblins. And who are those angry goblins? Other shittier Chinese car companies, and they're all getting paid massive amounts by the government to make more and more and more electric cars, even though they're not BYD and they suck, but they're getting paid to do it cheaply, and they're flooding the market with product. They don't suck that much. They just, their cars are fine. They just make them a little more expensively than BYD, right? Because they're not as good, but they're getting subsidies, so they're making them, and often at a loss. It's not just the subsidies, by the way. Even bigger than the subsidies is bank loans. I sounded like Trump right there. It's not just the subsidies, it's the bank loans. Like, anyway, so then it's bank loans are an even bigger deal than subsidies. And CSIS, the like military think tank, has a very good paper on this called Red Ink, where they basically just show like Chinese banks are just like lending untold amounts. They're all competing each other's profits to death. And so what you're supposed to do in like Industrial Policy 101, what you're supposed to do is do that for like 3 years until you figure out what the good companies are, then cut everybody else off and just have the good companies be good companies and then move on to your next sector you want to build, right? It's supposed to be this temporary thing. And Korea was very good at exercising this discipline because they had this military dictator named Park Chung-hee. He was like, okay, guys, you had your subsidies for 3 years. Hyundai won, I don't make the rules. Hyundai won. You're all cut off. All other car companies die except Hyundai. We win. And then like Korea wins, yay. And then they shot Park Chung-hee. It wasn't a popular thing to like stiff so many people and just like, I don't remember why they actually shot him, but his bodyguards, I think, killed him. But then, but Korea was able to do this. Japan was not able to do this. Japan is like, well, we want everyone to make everything. We want a million different TV companies and a million different, like, you know, companies making fucking CD players, whatever they make in the 90s, right? And then, so China's in this stage, right? And China, it's too early to tell whether China's going to be more like Korea and kill but Korea took a big hit to growth. Actually, Japan didn't sustain the bad companies as much as people think. Like it did sustain them to some degree, but like it didn't. It like in the 70s. So Japan in the 60s actually did do bank loans to like a million different companies to all produce the same thing, and then they would export their surplus. And then but then they cut them off in the 70s, and they started like having them cartelize and whatever to like reduce over competition. China's not doing that. China's just saying money, 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 make more cars, batteries, chips. Nobody's making any profit in China. Like who's making profit in China? Like no one. And that's why like rich Chinese people are getting out of China. They're like, there's no profit to be made here. Everyone else is just running the rat race, taking the government money and the cheap bank loans and just like making all the stuff. And so that's the problem in China's industrial policy. And what we're experiencing is the second China shock. This massive overseas flood of Chinese exports is happening because they're trying to sell this excess stuff anywhere they can. They're like, in China, we can't sell it because a million competitors are getting paid to compete our profits to zero. Where can we sell it? So they're selling it overseas. That is the second China shock. But it's still, people don't understand how big China is now. Yes, in the 2000s, China was a genuinely export-oriented economy, but now its exports as a percentage of GDP have been declining and are now below Japan even. They're well below France, Germany, well below South Korea, Poland, and all those guys, right? But then like, China's pretty low. It's not an export-oriented economy anymore. Like, and so they're just too big to like export their way out of this problem. But the backwash that we get from this, the overflow that we get, still feels like a giant shock to us because it's so honking big. You see what I'm saying? Like if you look at China, the percentage of China's cars that it exports, it's much, much lower than Germany, Korea, Japan, or any of these other automakers, right? Those countries export a lot of what they make. China exports almost none, like a tiny, tiny bit. Even exporting a much unusually small percent of its cars has allowed China to become the number one car exporter on earth because China's just that big. Okay. China is, like South Korea is like a powerhouse, right? China is like 30 times the size of South Korea. 30 times the size. So like when we get exports from China, even if we get just a little bit of exports, it looks like a titanic tsunami flood. By the way, China's sheer size is why America can only hope to match China by getting a really well integrated gang of like buddies with like India, Japan, Europe, and Korea. And we're not doing that.
We'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Every time I hop on the 101 freeway in SF, I look up at the various tech billboards and think, damn, turpentine should definitely be up there. And I bet I'm not alone. In a world of endless scrolling and ad blockers, sometimes the most powerful way to reach people is in the real world. That's where AdQuick comes in. The easiest way to book out-of-home ads, like billboards, vehicle wraps, and airport displays, the same way you would order an Uber. Started by Instacart alums, AdQuick was born from their own personal struggles to book and measure ad success. AdQuick's audience targeting, campaign management, and analytics bring the precision and efficiency of digital to the real world. Ready to get your brand the attention it deserves? Visit adquick.com today to start reaching your customers in the real world. Again, that's adquick.com.
How's China doing on the diplomacy front?
I mean, crappy. Like, they're still so China made two big mistakes and one sort of inevitable challenge. The inevitable challenge is that China is in a region where it has lots of competing territorial claims with a lot of other people, and it can't give up those claims without Xi Jinping getting domestically unpopular. So like China claims territory that's held by Indonesia and territory that's held by Malaysia and blah, blah, blah. The only territorial dispute they resolved was the one with Russia because Russia really, really needed China like off their back so they could fight Europe. But anyway, so which is not going well for them. Anyway, China, so on diplomacy, that's the challenge for China. China made two big mistakes. The first big mistake it made was called wolf warrior diplomacy, where they send these guys around to just talk big, and they talk like Kaiser Wilhelm. They're like, we will bury you. China is the future. Ha ha ha. We'll destroy you. And like, no one likes that. No one wants to hear that. No one wants to hear a big country's diplomats say like, we will bury you. We will destroy you. We are the future. You are the past. Like, come on, guys. Communication skills. But like Germany did that. Germany did this. Like during the Wilhelmine Germany era, it like for some reason they thought it would be great to have like all these like Prussian aristocrats go around saying like, we are the future, you are the past, our military is the best, and we'll crush you. It's like, guys. And so there was this giant anti-Germany coalition that formed and defeated them, even though they could have defeated any single opponent single-handedly if it was on a one-on-one. But anyway, so that happened in Germany. Y'all were dumb. But now China is doing this. And so the other mistake China made was the Belt and Road. So the Belt and Road sounded like a great scheme. It was China loans money to developing countries. Developing countries then take the money they just borrowed from China and use it to pay Chinese developers to build them infrastructure. And then with the proceeds from the infrastructure, they pay back the loan. This was a great idea if you were China, because you got a loan that they have to pay back, and you get to have your developers paid out, right? And so the developers did shitty work and just had no way to deal with local complications with like, oh, this group of minorities doesn't want you to take their land. Well, in China, you're just like, bye minorities. But then like, bye Felicia. But then in like Balochistan or whatever, they're like, no, we bomb you. So they bomb the pipeline in Pakistan. And then so the Belt and Road infrastructure goes well in precisely one country. It's called Indonesia. They built one high-speed rail that actually went really well. And it's because the Indonesian government sort of took it over, and they're like, we've seen all these other failures in these other countries. We're just going to take this over. So then it succeeded. Everybody's happy. But all these other countries are left with shitty infrastructure that no one uses and that was often built terribly. And now they're on the hook for the loan. And they're like, okay, well, how about some loan forgiveness, China? Just like the IMF always does for us. The West will always forgive our loans when we fuck up like this. And China's like, no, you borrowed the money. Now pay it back. And like at the same time, some of these countries put up collateral for these loans. And the collateral was the infrastructure itself. So China's like, well, Sri Lanka, we own one of your major ports now, and we can use it. And we promise not to use it for our Navy. We promise. And then so China then seizes control of the infrastructure that they built. So basically, China gets paid to own infrastructure in other countries. And they're like, wait a second, we just gave away part of our, basically part of our sovereignty for nothing. And China punked us. And a lot of countries are very mad about this. African countries are mad. China didn't care. They're like, Africa, all this shit will fail. We'll just pretend to build you some crappy highway. And then oh, you're on the hook for this. Well, you can't pay back. Well, give us mining rights and agricultural rights. Give us your farmland so we can have food security in case of a war with America. Give us your mining rights so we can have mineral security in case of a war with America. Blah, 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 blah. And so that happened. And then in Southeast Asia, China basically acted like, we're the boss, you inferior Southeast Asians. And they just they just treated even the Malaysians who suck up to China and just think China's the best. They even treated the Malaysians kind of crappy with the Belt and Road. And the Pakistanis, they suck up to China. They think China's the best. And they treated them badly. And then so, the Pakistani military actually did a coup against Imran Khan, who was there. It was not quite a coup, it was pseudo coup. They used the judiciary instead of rolling tanks through the streets. But then they got rid of Imran Khan. He was friendly to China. They were like, no, bro. So China did not make a lot of friends with that. So they're screwing up diplomatically, but we gave them this huge boon, this huge bonus, right? You could see opinions of China really cratering around the world. And people saw what happened in Hong Kong. They know China's aggressive. They know they're mean. They know they're not. They're not like the United States. They will not be your, sometimes unreliable buddy. But then the United States, we just shoot ourselves in the foot. We have a good thing going. We're winning the diplomacy war against China. And then we pull in Trump, and Trump's like, tariffs, tariffs, tariffs on all our allies. And then when China sort of fights back, he shifts to tariffing Europe because they're less able to fight back. They are able to fight back, actually, and we will be hurt by that. But then maybe less able than, not quite as able as China, so they seem like a softer target. So Trump just goes after soft targets, man. He bombs Iran after watching Israel like just slap Iran like a redheaded stepchild for like weeks, and Iran not be able to do anything other than like take out one block of Tel Aviv with some missiles. Like, Iran can't do shit. It's just like absolutely flailing, like, help. And then like Trump's like, okay, I'll drop 3 bombs on you. Haha, I'm so brave. Haha. Like, did people really think that scared China? I don't know. I have my doubts. I wouldn't be scared.
Right. Say more about the unprofitability problem in China's industrial policy.
Well, unprofitability, I mean, like, China maintains all of these companies that it's subsidized on life support for reasons of maintaining employment. It's in trouble. And then it becomes 90s Japan. So what happens, basically, you can see economic protest. The people lose their jobs, get mad, go protest. This had declined and declined and declined, and now you see it rising and rising and rising. There is unrest. The real estate bust has hit people hard. It has hit middle-class wealth. Everyone in China has all their wealth in real estate, even the rich people, honestly. Like, unless they have their own company, like then they have their money in an industrial thing. But like, nobody has their money in the freaking stock market. Like, people have their money in real estate. That's everybody's nest egg, right? You don't have your money in bonds like in Japan. You have real estate. And so people have all this real estate, and like, then real estate goes poof, and then suddenly the value of houses start going down and people start losing their nest eggs. Like, people do not like that. And so, and now people are getting laid off from all these property developer companies, right? All the construction workers getting laid off, like, contractors getting laid off, all these people who like build stuff getting laid off, plus middle-class people, real estate finance people getting laid off, real estate agents getting laid off, developers getting laid off, everybody's getting laid off. And so then like you had the spike in unemployment. And so China's like, okay, well, manufacturing is going to take up the slack, right? And then, but here's the thing, then now you've subsidized all these unprofitable companies. And now they're all doing manufacturing, all the same stuff, and competing each other out of all their profits. And so then so China has the choice of doing what Korea did and basically saying like, okay, we're going to let all the weak ones die so that like BYD and Xiaomi can like make profit. And, their profits will just make them great world-beating champions. Yes, we found our national champions, guys. We found them. Done. That's what they should do. Instead, the employment situation and the economic unrest that was already bad because of, not bad, but getting worse, let's say, because of the real estate bust, because of that, like, they'll be reluctant to winnow their field, to withdraw subsidies, and in their minds, they are fighting a war with America. In their minds, they're doing World War II production. That's what they're doing in their minds. And they don't want to give that up. They don't want to, like, they don't want to back off and just have a civilian economy focused on making money, especially if, that requires having a bunch of people laid off because a lot of China's industrial policy is inefficient. It is government control. All right. It is the government saying, go build this, go build this, go build this, when there's not demand for it. All right. This, like, the classic thing that planned economies get wrong is not having price signals and saying like, go build XYZ when nobody wants it. Right. I mean, look at the Soviet Union. They did this to an extreme. China's not nearly that bad. Okay. But it is on the margin. It's bad. All right. On the margin, they're being a little tiny bit like the Soviet Union here. Too much for their own good. And so, yeah. And so basically that's why profit has fallen, because they've just told people to build more stuff than the market will bear. And the only way they can rationalize that is by laying a bunch of people off and by giving up this sort of like dream of like drowning America in our massive fleet of like vehicles and whatever. And so, and then they'll be scared. They're scared that if they stop these subsidies, they're also scared that manufacturing will leave and go to India. So China right now is trying to hamstring India's manufacturing by preventing engineers from going over and teaching Indian people how to do manufacturing. So they're really trying to fuck India up because they know India's big. India's not very friendly to them. India could take some of their thunder, not like they couldn't outcompete them, but they could nip at their heels. Anyway, China doesn't want that. So they're trying to just punk India on manufacturing. And so really it's a dilemma for China, and what you risk happening is sort of like a lost decade. We can already see the flood of industrial loans start to go down. So you had real estate loans were very high, and then the real estate bust happened and they basically crashed. And then Xi Jinping directed all the state banks to lend to industrial companies instead. So you see industrial loans go up and basically one for one replace all the lost real estate loans in 23. Then 24 happened, and now it's 25, and the industrial loans are decreasing because everybody sees that it's not making any profit. You've got these zombie fucking companies. You had your banks lend money to every Tom, Dick, and Harry who said, hey, I've got an EV company, I've got a battery company, I've got a chip company, right? You did that. You just splashed money all over the freaking place. And so now you see industrial loans starting to decline, like or at least the rate of growth is like plunged. And so that was short-lived. But when they finally, and they could go to war with us and then sustain production for the purpose of war, which is what we did in World War II. We didn't go to war so that we could sustain production. We sustained production so we could fight World War II. But if China goes to war with us, then that will provide them, however long that war lasts, 5 minutes or however long that war lasts, that will give them a reason to like have the government buy 1 billion vehicles, 1 billion drones and 1 billion tanks and 1 billion whatever, right? Planes, I don't know. So then chips. And so then that will give them an excuse to do that. So they could do that, but if they don't go to like a massive world war, what are they going to do with this production? They're either going to endure a lot of short-term pain cleaning it up, right? And a lot of short-term reduction growth and probably recession, cleaning it up and make a lot of people mad in the short term, or they're going to extend and pretend. And if they extend and pretend, then they will suffer productivity slowdown in the long term, and and their economy will risk stagnation. Aging is not a problem for them yet, but it will be a problem in maybe a bit of a problem in 10 years from now. Like 10 years from now. So you do not want this to go on for 10 more years. You do not want this crap to go on for 10 more years if you're China, because then aging starts to bite, and then you're a little bit in trouble. Then you are Japan, right? China in general is 30 years behind Japan and everything. And so like in terms of aging, in terms of like where they're on sort of the development cycle here, maybe a little more than 30 years behind Japan in development cycle, but they caught up. They went very fast. But yeah, so basically in 10 years, China's going to start experiencing some problems from aging. And in like 20 years, it's going to be severe, right? 20 years, things get bad for China. 10 years, things start to get somewhat less good. And then, so basically, I think they want to fix it before that bites. And if you keep all these companies on life support for a decade, then you're going to only clean it up once aging hits. So like Japan finally cleaned up all these like zombie bad bank loans in like the mid 2000s. But the mid 2000s, that was like, let's say 13 years after their big bust. 13, 14 years after their big bust. By that time, aging was really starting to bite, and they missed their window to have this large, sort of Gen X millennial sort of generation they had. They had this fairly large generation that could have done a lot more, but they were hampered by the fact that like bad loans were taking up all of banks' balance sheets, and banks wouldn't lend money to anybody. You didn't have good venture finance. You didn't have good financing for Japanese stuff. And so there's sort of a lost generation where you had all these really good entrepreneurs, but then like they couldn't really do much because of the financing situation. And then you finally clean up the financing situation right in time for your country to suddenly like your demographics to fall off a cliff. China's got a much steeper cliff than Japan did.
Yeah.
So that's where they are.
I want to be mindful of time. That might be a good place to wrap. Is there anything related to this topic that we didn't get to say, or should we wrap on that?
I think that's it. I think we covered everything from the last couple of weeks. That was whirlwind tour, man.
Yeah. No, I love that. Awesome. Well, as always, until next time. This is a great episode.
Until next time, sir.
Okay. Great.
Econ 102 is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Moment of Zen, In the Arena, The Cognitive Revolution, and more. If you like what you hear, subscribe and leave us a review in the App Store. You can keep up with both of our Substacks for written analysis of the topics we cover in the show at noahopinion.substack.com and eriktorenberg.substack.com. Thanks for listening.